Hello cuties, I'm Paola from Paola, and today we will discover the most effective method to learn vocabulary in any language. I don't think I have to tell you why vocabulary is so important in a language, because if you really think about it, a language is just a bunch of sounds that make up words that put together by some sort of rules make sense to a large group of people. That's a language. So words and vocabulary are for me the most essential part of learning a language, because I'm not saying that grammar is not as important, but if you don't have the words in the first place, how are you going to express yourself in another language? Do you know what I mean? Let's just say you're in a new country where you don't know the language, but you've learned a couple words beforehand. If you go up to a person and just say, me, food, they will probably understand you're hungry and just send you to the closest restaurant. Was the sentence correct? Absolutely not. There was no grammar involved whatsoever, but you still made your point across. However, before learning about the most effective method to learn vocabulary, we must understand how our memory works. You see, our brain is like a giant memory stick, but unfortunately information is not stored for a long period of time if we don't actively use it. So psychologists have found that there are three main stages when trying to store new information into our brain, such as words: encoding, storage, and retrieval. Encoding is the first stage, and it can occur through sound, images, or meaning. Encoding essentially requires paying attention to information and linking it to existing knowledge in order to make the new information kind of meaningful to us. So the way this works is that our brains are so huge that what happens is when you encounter a new word and maybe you discover the meaning of it, or you see an image, in some way you spend a little bit of time trying to remember that word. That is the first stage of encoding that new piece of information. Coding basically transforms a new information into a memory without really any conscious awareness, as in you might remember or not what you had for lunch or for dinner yesterday, but you haven't really made an effort to remember that information. Once we are done learning this new piece of information, the second stage starts, which is storage, and as the name suggests, it involves holding this new piece of information for a short or extended period of time. We all know that short-term memory has a limited capacity, and it's not really useful for us language learners, obviously. But storing an information in our long-term memory is really difficult if we skip the third and, in my opinion, most important step, which is retrieval. As we all know, long-term memory has almost unlimited storage capacity, and the new information that makes it to our long-term memory can remain there for a lifetime. But in order to use that information and effectively remember words in a new language, we need to know how to constantly retrieve these new pieces of information, or words in this case. What happens is that during the retrieval process, we are basically just getting the information out of our long-term memory and returning it to our conscious mind. And to do this, there are two main methods of retrieving information, which are recognition and recall. So what does this mean in terms of actual language learning? How can we implement this knowledge into our language learning routine? So first of all, you might be in need of actual words that you want to learn, because when we start learning a language, it can get kind of difficult to understand which words are more important to learn. But there actually are so many ways in which we can acquire vocabulary. Let it be taking Netflix and turning on a show in the target language and just writing down all the words that we cannot understand. Or we can take a song in the target language and just learn the words that we don't know from that song, like I did here or here somewhere, where I took the song We Don't Talk About Bruno and just learned it in German. But we can do the same while reading a book, listening to the radio, or, and that would be my favorite method, actually looking around us and notice the names that we don't know in the target language of all the objects that surround us. So after we have our vocabulary list and we have encoded the meaning of some new words, we need to write it down somewhere. So in that way, they will stay in our short-term memory. Again, we can write it down on a notebook, tablet, computer, anything, as long as we start the storage process into at least our short-term memory. But as I said before, the most important and the most effective way to remember vocabulary is retrieval. So we need to implement the way we retrieve this new information. Because it's easy to say, oh, I'm trying to learn a new language, but I really cannot remember all the vocabulary. But if you don't actually make an effort to recall it, these words will never be implemented into your long-term memory, which is eventually our goal. So, the way to retrieve vocabulary effectively is to set a daily practice for it, because habits are formed more easily when we have the same repeated cue or context. So, I know we all lead very busy lives, but you can take a little notebook around wherever you are, and you can write down words or even revise them while you're waiting for the bus, while you're having a lunch break, 5 minutes before going to bed. Just take those 5 minutes to go through your list and try to actively recall the words that you've been trying to learn. And I know that you've heard it before, but really the most effective way to implement a word into our long-term memory is to use spaced repetition. Because trying to repeat the same word even 100 times but cramming it into just one day is not going to help you store that piece of information into your long-term memory. So if you like paper and you like to keep your vocabulary lists on notebooks, you can use a notebook and use either the gold list method, which uses spaced repetition, or you could just write the words in your target language on one column and write the English or the translation into your native language on the other column. In this way, when you're trying to retrieve this information, you can just cover one of the two columns and see if you can remember the meaning in your target language or vice versa. This method with the two columns work, but then you would need to remember which days you have revised certain words, and then if one day you don't remember a certain word, you would have to revise it twice. So I think the most effective way to do this without giving yourself so much work is to use a flashcard app or actual flashcard that you can just make yourself. However, I still think that the flashcard apps like Anki or Quizlet have the best spaced repetition methods. Although I know that their interface can be quite boring sometimes, so it doesn't make you want to study more vocabulary. But I have a tip for that. In fact, my favorite method is when I'm trying to retrieve information using flashcards, when I start to get a bit bored of just going through flashcards, I just take 3 of the words that maybe I remember less, or just 3 random words, and I try to write sentences with these 3 words that I'm trying to remember. This way the storage process will actually speed up, and you are actually making use of these new words that you're learning right off the bat. And if you're interested in seeing which flashcard app is actually the best, stay tuned because I have a video coming up about it next week on Friday. But I think this is it for today. These were all the tips that I had for you in order to learn vocabulary more efficiently. So I hope you learned something new, and I hope I convinced you to go and download now a new flashcard app or to go out and buy a new notebook for your vocabulary lists. Don't forget that all articles related to the topic I've mentioned today are in the description below. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, please remember to leave a like and a comment telling me your experience about language learning, and subscribe to the channel to not miss any updates. Please stay safe, drink lots of water, and I'll see you soon. Bye!